As the Prime Minister warns, the country is at a perilous moment, and no better illustration of it than those two speakers. We are joined now by the Policing Minister, Kit Malthouse. Mr Malthouse, thanks very much indeed for joining us. We just heard there from an expert in critical care who said, you know, Christmas mixing has led us to where we are. I remember interviewing one of your colleagues just before Christmas, and, you know, that we knew that this was going to be the result if you allowed people to get together over Christmas. You acted too late, didn't you? And now it frustrates me and other people that government ministers decide that it's time to blame the public for not following the rules, when you did act too late in December and you could have locked down earlier.
Well, Susanna, I don't think anybody is blaming the public, but what we are trying to do today is to communicate to the small minority of people, and it was very, very powerful hearing the interviews that you've just done, communicate to the small minority of people who aren't taking this seriously, as Piers said, that if there was ever a time to do so, it's now. You quite rightly pointed out the perilous state that the NHS finds itself in, and the fact that the numbers are mounting on a daily basis. We've obviously got this new variant which emerged just in the last few weeks, and obviously the Prime Minister's had to take very agile decisions both before Christmas, then immediately after Christmas, and now subsequently, to try and react to this very, very fast-moving situation. And I think what we're trying to communicate today, and it's so great that you had the NHS on to illustrate this, is that if we all recognise our collective duty towards our fellow citizens, but in particular towards the health service and those people who are bravely working within it, then the sort of imperative to obey the rules as closely as we possibly can, to stick by the rules and think carefully about why we're leaving the house, becomes even stronger. You know, if we want this to be the last...
One of the issues is clarity. It's incredibly difficult for most people to get their heads around most of these rules because there are so many, and a lot of it is guidance, some is law, and so on. And it's hard for most people, I think, to work it out, even down to little things. You know, who can you go for a walk with in the park? Are you allowed to? And we have this juxtaposition just to show an illustration of the mixed messaging. And I'm not going to take the high moral ground with Boris Johnson having a cycle. He should have a cycle. We want people to keep fit. But if you're going to have the police arresting two women in the middle of a country field, with a cup of coffee each, of supposedly having an illegal picnic, and they're going to get fined. It's been withdrawn. But if that's going to be happening in Derbyshire, and the Prime Minister then is going further away, 2 miles further away, 7 miles, to have his cycle, you can understand why the public go, well, hang on, what is the rule then? What am I allowed to do?
Yeah, look, I recognise that, you know, it's very hard for us to legislate for every single variety of human activity, and that, you know, the notion of leaving the house to exercise, not to socialise or for recreation, to exercise depends on what you're doing. So, you know, if you're training for a marathon, hopefully marathons will resume later this year. If you're training for a marathon, you're obviously running, you know, a lot further than 7 miles. A 7-mile cycle seems to me perfectly reasonable. I know a lot of cyclists who cycle a lot further than that and won't interact with anybody while they're doing that.
But what about two people? What about two people like those women who just want to get in a car individually, drive to the middle of nowhere with their own coffee and walk 2 meters apart in open air in the middle of nowhere with no other people?
Well, obviously, Derbyshire Police, as I understand it, had a look at that circumstance, and as you say, Piers, have withdrawn the penalty notice.
Matt Hancock's initial reaction to that story was to support the police action. That's where the confusion comes. Matt Hancock says, I agree with the police, and everyone goes, well, hang on, how could that possibly be illegal when on the same day or next day we see hundreds, if not thousands of fans at the Marine FC Tottenham game congregating outside the stadium with a load of police doing absolutely nothing? It's that kind of different visuals where people are like, what? Can't get my head around this.
Yeah, no, look, I completely understand. And, you know, obviously we all support the police, not least most strongly me, in recognising that what they're dealing with is very, very difficult circumstances out there and quite complex circumstances where your frontline copper is having to make difficult decisions about people's behaviour. If you remember from the first lockdown, we did have a period where, as guidance bedded in, people got used to the rules, the police created the relationship that was required for compliance. I mean, if you remember in the first lockdown, it was driving to walk the dog was the big controversy. And obviously, we're reviewing it as we go. The key thing, though,
I honestly don't think you should take away people's right to exercise. And if people decide that exercising is going for a walk, they should absolutely be allowed to do that. And Derbyshire Police have acknowledged that they made a mistake in that case. We have a bigger issue, don't we, about mask wearing. And
so just on the exercise, Susanna, sorry, I completely agree with you. And one of the balances that we're trying to strike here is obviously between people's physical and mental and economic well-being and the passage of the virus. Yeah. And it's a very difficult one to strike. But at this particular point, as your interviews pointed out, it's so perilous that everybody really needs to think seriously about why they are leaving the house and whether they really need to do
so. I think there are more. I think leaving the house for exercise totally legitimate. Is leaving the house for a coffee, because, you can get takeaway coffee, is that legitimate? You have huge queues of people outside crowding pavements. I totally sympathise with restaurants who are struggling at the moment. But frankly, is that an essential service?
Well, if you're getting coffee on your way to do your exercise, or as part of your acquiring food, or one of those reasons that you're allowed to be out of the house, then that is legitimate. But that's not my
question. Is it essential for those places to be open?
But look, Susanna, this is one of those Scotch egg moments, right, where it's very hard for us as legislators to legislate for every single nuance of human behaviour. What we're relying on is what you both have talked about in the past, which is people having a common sense of themselves of what they think is appropriate within the rules.
No, I think people rely on the government to make very clear rules about what it's okay to do.
I mean, for example, the supermarkets. Two supermarket chains have now said, Sainsbury's and Morrison, that they are going to enforce mask wearing. Who's going to do that enforcement? Are police going to be going into these supermarkets and arresting people for not wearing a mask, for example?
So what we hope is that the vast majority of all supermarkets will, reimpose the person at the door, the traffic light system if they have one, the sanitizing stations, all that stuff we've seen in the past.
Will police be encouraged by you to go in to these supermarkets and arrest people if they breach the rules?
Seeing as it's the law.
So police are always available on standby if there is crime.
Do you want them to do that?
In relation to that, and we've handed out, I think, 700 and odd fixed penalty notices in those kind of environments, in retail environments where people aren't complying. Look, the vast majority of people will comply, and I think when supermarkets remind them, not least because they have to protect their own staff as well.
If people refuse, there are anti-maskers out there. If they literally refuse, is your direction firmly to the police? You're the police minister. Go in and arrest people if they refuse to wear masks. Is the situation that serious that if people simply refuse to do it in a place surrounded by food, for example, they will get arrested?
Well, Piers, as you know, the police are operationally independent, so I can't order them to do anything, happily. But what I do know is that where a crime is being committed, where disorder is breaking out, and that might be where somebody is resisting putting their mask on and being, aggressive about that, then the police can be called. And in those circumstances, in the past, we have seen them respond and we have seen them deal with those individuals.
OK, final question. We've got Geoffrey Boycott joining us. He's had his first jab. He's had a number of underlying health concerns and he's, heading over 80 now. So he's very concerned about the fact that his second jab has now been delayed. Before we get to him, and he'll be off his long run, as you can imagine, what comfort can you give Sir Geoffrey that he shouldn't worry about the fact he won't be getting his second jab for a few more weeks than he thought?
Well, what the scientists tell us and what Jonathan Van Tam has said is that, the first vaccine is giving a very high element of protection. The second one is the icing on the cake and the top up. And we are better off maximising the number with the first vaccine before we get to the second one. He will get his second one. It will come in a matter of weeks, but his immune system will already be responding to the first vaccine. And, as the greatest living Yorkshireman, let's hope he lives a long time into the future.
OK, Kit Malthouse, thank you for joining us. We appreciate it.